Welcome back to the show. Today, we're going to be looking at something, a story of resilience
Hmm.
and reinvention, a political comeback
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that really shocked the nation, I think. It's 1968,
Oh, yeah.
a year we remember for uh, maybe all the wrong reasons.
Hmm.
Assassinations,
Yeah.
riots,
Right.
a war that seemed like it would never end, and right in the middle of all this turmoil,
Mm-hmm.
a figure that a lot of people had just written off, completely written off,
Yeah.
rises from the ashes.
Hmm.
Richard Nixon.
It's amazing.
So how did a man who once said,
Right.
you won't have Nixon to kick around anymore,
Yeah.
how do you manage to win the presidency just 6 years later?
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly what we're going to uncover in this deep dive.
It's a great question.
We've got historical accounts, we've got campaign speeches, we've even got some behind-the-scenes looks from journalists who were
That's the great.
embedded in the heart of it all.
Oh, that's awesome.
So really getting into the thick of it.
Yeah. I think it's a story that
Yeah.
in many ways, mirrors the anxieties and the divisions of that whole era. You have a nation grappling with social change,
Yeah.
economic uncertainty, and just like a real crisis of confidence in its leadership.
Yeah.
And into this void steps Nixon,
Right.
promising stability, order, and kind of a return to what he called the silent majority.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that. When you look back at Nixon's career,
Yeah.
it's hard not to be struck by just how tenacious
Yes.
the man was.
Totally.
He loses the 60 presidential election to Kennedy
Heartbreaker.
in just a total heartbreaker.
Yeah.
Then 2 years later, suffers this humiliating defeat in the California governor's race.
Oh, yeah.
And it was after that loss that he gave that infamous last press conference, right?
Oh, yeah.
Just almost like declaring his political career dead with that outburst.
He's like, done.
Yeah, and yet, when you look at those personal resolutions that he wrote
It's fascinating.
after his defeats,
It is.
you see a man determined to learn from his mistakes.
Yeah.
He vowed to improve his time management,
Oh.
to refine his public image, and really to engage more
Wow.
with the pressing issues of the day. He knew. I mean, he absolutely
Yeah.
knew. He had to shed that label of sore loser
Yeah.
and reinvent himself as a statesman
Yeah.
if he wanted any chance of returning to the national stage.
Absolutely.
It's almost like he went into a self-imposed exile.
Yeah.
Takes a job as a corporate lawyer in New York.
Hmm.
But from what we see in the sources, it's he was absolutely miserable
Oh, yeah.
in that world. His daughters were debutantes.
Oh, wow.
He's rubbing shoulders with the country club set,
Right.
but he couldn't shake this feeling
Oh, no.
that he was meant for something more.
Right.
And his friends were worried about him too.
Yeah.
Some even feared that he was
Which I'm imagining.
on the verge of a breakdown. But thankfully, he had allies like Jackie Robinson and
Wow.
Billy Graham,
Oh, wow.
who encouraged him to get back into politics.
Oh, that's interesting.
They recognized that that he had a unique set of talents.
Yeah.
And saw the potential for him to make
Shake.
a real difference.
Yeah.
So he starts working his way back, starts campaigning for other Republicans, rebuilding relationships,
Yeah.
and really carefully crafting a new image.
Yeah.
By 1968, he's not the fiery,
Yeah.
sometimes impulsive Nixon of the past.
Yeah.
He's presenting himself as this seasoned,
Right.
thoughtful leader,
Yeah.
someone who understands the anxieties of
Yes.
everyday Americans and can offer a steady hand in
Absolutely.
a world that felt like it was very turbulent.
Oh, yeah. 1968 was something else.
Yeah.
So different from like the early 60s,
Right.
all that optimism and hope.
Right.
Gone.
Yeah.
This is a year of assassinations, riots, and the war just
Yeah.
tearing the country apart.
Uh-huh.
It felt like things were falling apart, you know?
Right.
Like the American dream was slipping away.
The assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy just months apart.
It's unbelievable.
I mean, it just sent shockwaves through the nation.
Yeah.
And the Tet Offensive in Vietnam just shattered any
Totally.
illusion of a quick victory.
Right.
And cities across the country are erupting in protests and riots.
It was a perfect storm for a candidate like Nixon.
Yeah.
You know, who could really tap into that yearning for stability and order.
Right.
He sensed that a lot of Americans were just exhausted by the chaos.
Yeah,
They just longed for a return to normalcy. But even with the national mood kind of shifting in his favor,
right,
he still had to secure that Republican nomination.
right.
And it wasn't a cakewalk.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
He faced some tough competition from figures like Nelson Rockefeller, the liberal governor of New York,
Of course.
and Ronald Reagan,
Oh, wow.
charismatic former actor and governor of California,
Hmm.
who was already making waves
Oh, yeah.
with his strong law and order stance.
That's interesting. Reagan's
Yeah.
law and order message was a bit different from Nixon's, though.
Interesting. How so?
Well, Reagan was much more explicitly appealing to, those conservative anxieties about social change and the civil rights movement, especially in the South.
But Nixon, ever the strategist,
Right.
neutralizes Reagan by forming an alliance with Strom Thurmond,
Wow.
a very a powerful Southern senator known for his
Right.
staunch segregationist views. This was a calculated move.
It was.
No doubt.
Yeah.
But it solidified Nixon's
Yeah.
hold on the Southern vote, paving the way for his nomination.
Yeah, and it speaks to Nixon's willingness to kind of like navigate these complexities of racial politics in a nation that was so divided. I mean, he understood how important that Southern vote was.
Right.
He wasn't afraid to make deals
Right.
with controversial figures to secure it.
And then you've got the wild card,
Mm-hmm.
his choice of Spiro Agnew
Oh, yeah.
as his running mate. Agnew, the governor of Maryland,
Yeah.
wasn't exactly a household name
Right.
at the time.
Agnew was, I think, a shrewd choice, though.
Yeah.
I mean, he appealed to that same silent majority that Nixon was courting, those who felt ignored by the elites,
Yeah.
worried about rising crime,
Right.
social unrest.
He had gained notoriety
He had.
for his tough stance on law and order,
Right.
especially after the Baltimore riots following the assassination of Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
So you got Nixon positioning himself as the calm, experienced leader,
Uh-huh.
and Agnew becomes the attack dog,
Right.
voicing the frustrations of those who felt that their values and their way of life was under attack.
He was a powerful combination.
Yeah.
It tapped into this deep vein of anxiety and resentment that was just brewing beneath the surface.
And you can see this in the way that the campaign was run, right?
Oh, yeah.
Nixon's team, led by figures like H.R. Haldeman and Roger Ailes, were masters of
Wow.
media manipulation.
Masters.
They understood the power of television
Yeah.
and how to use it to create a specific narrative.
Absolutely.
They weren't just relying on those traditional rallies and speeches.
Right.
They were pioneering a new approach
Totally.
to political communication,
Yeah.
using carefully staged town halls
Mhm.
and just impactful commercials designed to appeal directly to the voters' emotions.
Oh, right, to their emotions.
I mean, this is the era of Mad Men, right?
Right.
Advertising is becoming this incredibly sophisticated
Yeah.
and pervasive force.
Oh.
And Nixon's campaign was right there on the cutting edge,
Right.
figuring out how to use these new techniques to sell a candidate
Yeah.
like they were selling a car or a box of cereal.
It's fascinating to see how their strategies evolved,
Yeah.
throughout the campaign.
Yeah.
They were constantly analyzing, what worked, what didn't, adapting their message, their approach to maximize their impact.
And a key part of that message was that law and order rhetoric
Oh, yeah.
that became so central to Nixon's campaign.
Absolutely.
On the surface, it seemed like a reasonable response
Yeah.
to the rising crime rates and social unrest.
Right.
But digging into the sources,
Yeah.
you could really see how this message was carefully crafted
Yeah.
to appeal to a very specific audience.
Exactly. I mean, we've got quotes
Yeah.
from Nixon himself, his aides, that suggest a very deliberate effort to exploit white voters' fears about Black unrest and social change. Whether you call it the Southern strategy or something else, there's no doubt that they were tapping into a deep well of racial anxiety to secure those votes.
It really raises the question, was Nixon
Does.
simply responding to a legitimate concern about crime?
Right.
Or was he cynically exploiting
Yeah.
racial divisions for political gain?
big question.
Yeah, it's a debate that continues to this day.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that even in a democracy, elections can be these messy, complicated affairs.
Oh, yeah. And it's not just historians, that are fascinated by this.
Right.
The way Nixon's campaign was run, the use of media, the whole image, it was all chronicled in this groundbreaking book called The Selling of the President by this young journalist named Joe McGinnis.
And he got
incredible access
to the inner workings
of the campaign.
Yeah. Wow.
And what he revealed was fascinating and disturbing.
He actually quotes one of Nixon's ad men saying they deliberately set out to make their ads cheap and vulgar to appeal to the lowest common denominator of American taste. I mean, you don't see that kind of honesty from political operatives these days.
Not at all.
It's a stark reminder.
It is.
Of just how powerful marketing is, right?
Yeah.
And how it can be used to shape public opinion.
Yeah.
Even when the product being sold is something as important as a presidential candidate.
But here's the irony. For all that sophistication, Nixon was still seen as this this stiff, awkward figure, especially compared to, like, Hubert Humphrey, his Democratic opponent, who was known for his charisma and his passionate speeches.
It's almost like the campaign was so focused on control and image that they sucked all the life out of Nixon himself. He became this carefully packaged, sanitized version of himself, which might have appealed to some voters, but also make him seem a bit robotic and unrelatable. Yeah. And that lack of spontaneity would come back to haunt him as the campaign wore on. Yeah. The press, bored with Nixon's carefully staged events and those scripted pronouncements started to focus on Humphrey's underdog story. Yeah. His willingness to break with the Johnson administration on Vietnam.
Right.
And then just when it seemed like Nixon had the election in the bag, everything changed. Well, 5 days before the election, President Johnson drops a bombshell. Okay. A complete halt to the bombing of North Vietnam and a real possibility of peace talks in Paris.
It's a game changer. Yeah. It just gave Humphrey's campaign this jolt of energy. Right. And it put Nixon on the defensive. Suddenly, the prospect of ending the war was front and center. Right. And Nixon's lead in the polls, it just began to evaporate.
And this is where things take a really conspiratorial turn.
A truly conspiratorial turn. There's this theory that Nixon, fearing a loss, worked behind the scenes to sabotage those peace talks.
No, at the center of it all.
At the center of it all is Anna Chennault. Okay. This prominent Republican fundraiser and socialite. Okay. With close ties to South Vietnam. Wow. She's even referred to as the Dragon Lady in some accounts.
It sounds like something out of a spy novel. Uh-huh. So what exactly was she?
Yeah, so what was she accused of doing? Well, the accusation is that she acted as this back channel between the Nixon campaign and the South Vietnamese government, urging them to resist the peace talks and to hold out for a better deal if Nixon won the election.
And there is some evidence to support this, right?
There is.
I mean, we know that we know that Nixon was worried about the impact of the peace talks on his campaign.
We do. I mean, there are notes from H.R. Haldeman, Nixon's top aide, talking about keeping Chennault working on SVN. Right. That's South Vietnam. And LBJ was convinced that that Nixon was playing dirty. Huh. He even called Chennault, that damn little old woman who was meddling in affairs that were, frankly, none of her business.
So it seems plausible that she was acting as a conduit for Nixon's concerns, even if it meant going against official U.S. policy.
It's certainly possible. Yeah. But proving a direct link between between Nixon's actions and the collapse of those peace talks is another matter.
So what's the...
what's the other side of the story?
The other side of the story.
Like, why shouldn't we believe that Nixon was behind this?
Right.
Well, for one thing, the South Vietnamese government, they had their own reasons for wanting to delay or derail the peace talks. They were very distrustful of the North Vietnamese communists. They wanted guarantees for their security that weren't part of the proposed agreement.
Right.
I mean, they'd been fighting this brutal war for years.
Yeah.
And they weren't about to just accept a deal that felt like a betrayal.
Right.
And their leader, President Thieu, already saw Nixon as a better bet than Humphrey.
Yeah.
He believed Nixon would be tougher on communism, more supportive of their cause.
Exactly. And recent scholarship has actually shed more light on the South Vietnamese perspective.
Yeah.
Historian David L. Anderson, who's studied those South Vietnamese sources extensively, argues that Thieu had already decided against participating in the peace talks, regardless of any pressure from Nixon or Chanel.
So LBJ might have overestimated his influence over the South Vietnamese, thinking he had more leverage than he actually did. He might have been getting bad intelligence or, allowing his own desire to see Humphrey win just cloud his judgment.
Right.
The point is, focusing just on Nixon, it ignores those complex realities of the situation.
Right.
And the agency of the South Vietnamese themselves. I mean, they were key players in all of this, not just pawns in some Nixonian scheme.
Okay, so maybe Nixon didn't single-handedly sabotage the peace talks.
Yeah.
But he still benefited from their collapse.
Right. I mean, there's no question that the collapse of the peace talks played a role in Nixon's victory.
Right.
It reinforced his message of strength, of resolve, contrasting with Humphrey's perceived weakness and his association with the Johnson administration.
It's also worth remembering that the election was incredibly close.
Yeah.
Nixon won by a razor-thin margin in the popular vote.
And Humphrey was closing that gap in the final days, too,
Yeah.
which suggests that that other factors besides just those peace talks were at play.
So where does that leave us on the...
where does that leave us on the...
October surprise.
October surprise!
And the Anna Chennault affair.
The Anna Chennault affair. Did Nixon cheat his way to victory?
Right.
I mean, it's a question that historians continue to debate.
Right.
The evidence is circumstantial.
Yeah.
There's no smoking gun proving direct interference.
Right.
But Nixon's campaign definitely engaged in some questionable back channel communications, and he definitely benefited from the timing of the peace talks collapse.
It's one of those historical mysteries.
It is.
That may never be fully solved.
Probably not.
It makes you really think about the lengths
it does
to which people will go to achieve power.
It speaks to the complexities of ambition, right? And just that murky world of politics where the line between strategy and manipulation can be so blurry.
We started this deep dive by asking how Nixon, the loser of 1960 and 1962, managed to pull off such a stunning comeback. And it seems like it was a combination of factors.
Yeah.
He was the right man at the right time.
Yeah.
He had his own political skills and a campaign that
masterfully
exploited those anxieties of a nation in turmoil.
Absolutely. He tapped into that yearning for stability, for a return to like a simpler time, for a strong leader who could restore order.
Yeah.
And his campaign's use of television, it helped project that image directly into the living rooms of millions of Americans.
It's almost Shakespearean, isn't it?
It is.
The man who was so publicly humiliated, who seemed to have lost everything, claws his way back to the pinnacle of power.
But even in victory, there's this sense of unease, right?
Yeah.
This hint of darkness that would eventually consume his presidency.
Even on election night.
I know.
As the results came in and it became clear that he won. There were no wild celebrations. Yeah. No champagne toasts.
No.
He spent most of the evening alone in his hotel suite.
Really?
Nervously scribbling notes.
So much for bringing us together.
Well, those were his words,
right.
At least. The next day, when he gave his victory speech, he talked about seeing a sign during the campaign that said, bring us together.
Wow.
And he used that phrase
he did.
to call for unity in healing
right.
in a nation that was very deeply divided.
Oh, it was brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a brilliant rhetorical move.
Right.
He took this simple phrase, this plea for unity, and just turned it into this powerful symbol of his presidency.
But knowing what we know.
I know. It makes you wonder.
About Nixon.
Yeah.
It's hard not to be a little cynical, right?
Right.
Was he sincere?
Or
was it just another calculated move by a master manipulator?
Nixon is such a complex figure.
Yeah.
Capable of great political vision, but he was also ruthless, deeply distrustful of his opponents.
And his actions during Watergate, I mean, they don't really paint the picture of someone who believed in bringing people together.
No. But there are those who argue that, that even Nixon, with all his flaws, had moments of genuine sincerity. They point to his efforts to, open relations with China, his support for environmental protection, his attempts to reform welfare and healthcare.
So maybe he did mean those words.
Maybe.
In his victory speech.
It's possible.
Maybe in that moment he truly believed he could bridge those divides that were tearing the country apart.
Or maybe it was just another performance.
Right.
I mean, we have that quote from his speechwriter, William Safire, who described Nixon's almost gleeful reaction to knowing that his rivals would just hate his bring us together speech.
It suggests a certain level of cynicism, a sense of satisfaction in knowing he could outmaneuver his critics and manipulate public perception.
It's almost like he was playing a part,
right?
Putting on a mask for the public.
Yeah.
And that's what makes Nixon such a fascinating and frustrating figure to study, right?
Yeah.
He's a reminder that even the most powerful people are still human, capable of both good and bad.
Right.
Sincerity and deception.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Nixon's 1968 victory.
Nixon's 68 victory.
What are the key takeaways for you?
Well, I think it's a story that challenges us to think about the nature of leadership, the complexities of ambition, and just the role of media and messaging in shaping public opinion.
It also reminds us that history isn't just something that happened in the past. Right. It's a living, breathing thing that continues to shape our present and our future.
It does.
The anxieties and the divisions that Nixon exploited in 1968 are still with us today.
Oh yeah,
in different forms.
Of course, different forms.
But the echoes are
there.
Are undeniable.
It's a reminder that we need to be critical consumers of information.
Right.
We need to be aware of the ways that that those in power can manipulate.
Right.
Our fears or prejudices.
We need to ask questions, challenge assumptions.
Ask questions, challenge those assumptions.
And engage in...
just engage in thoughtful,
respectful dialogue, even when it's difficult.
Even when it's hard. Yeah.
Well said. If this deep dive piqued your interest, I encourage you to check out the books and the articles that we mentioned.
Yeah.
We'll have links to those on our website.
Perfect.
And let us know what you think.
Yeah, what do you think?
What stood out to you? What questions do you still have? We might just explore them in a future episode.
Yeah.
Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive to the story.
The stories
that matter. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those tough questions.
Great political vision, but also, ruthless and really distrustful of his opponents.
And his actions during Watergate.
Oh, right. Yeah.
They really don't paint a picture of someone who believed in bringing people together.
Not really, but there are people who would argue that even Nixon, with all his flaws, had moments of real sincerity, you know? I mean, they point to his efforts to open relations with China, his support for environmental protection, you know, and his attempts to reform welfare and health care.
So maybe in that moment when he gave that that victory speech, he truly believed he could bridge those divides that were tearing the country apart.
It's possible. Or maybe it was, you know, just another performance. I mean, we do have that quote from his speechwriter, William Safire, who described Nixon's reaction, you know, almost gleeful reaction to knowing that his rivals would just hate the bring us together speech.
It suggests...
I mean, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, a certain level of cynicism there.
Yeah.
This satisfaction in knowing he could outmaneuver his critics, and manipulate public perception.
It's almost as if he was playing a part. You know, putting on this this mask for the public.
Right.
And that's, I think, what makes Nixon such a fascinating and frustrating figure to study. He's this reminder that even the most powerful people are still human,
capable of both good and bad.
Right. Capable of good and bad, sincerity, deception.
Sincerity and deception. Yeah. Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive into Richard Nixon's 1968 victory.
Okay.
So thank you to everyone for listening. We encourage you to check out the sources that we mentioned.
Yes, please do.
In today's episode, you can find links to all of those on our website.
Absolutely.
And as always, we want to hear from you.
Yeah. Let us know what you think.
Did anything in particular stand out?
Yeah, what stood out?
What questions do you still have?
Yeah, what are you wondering about?
We might just explore those in a future episode.
Yeah.
And of course, be sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss our next deep dive into the stories that matter.
Yes, subscribe.
Until then, keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
Keep learning.
Keep learning, absolutely.
And keep asking those tough questions.